A cop's fist flies. A girl hits the pavement. But the man standing behind her? He's not just her father. He's the new chief of police. Jasmine Cole was barely paying attention as she stepped out of the gas station convenience store, scrolling through her phone with one hand and holding a bottle of soda in the other. It was a quick stop, just something to break up the long ride home with her father, Anthony Reed. He was checking the time on his watch, already thinking about dinner, when everything shifted in an instant. She barely noticed the man until she bumped into him. It wasn't a hard hit, more like an accidental shoulder brush, but the reaction was instant. "Watch where you're going," a voice snapped. Jasmine looked up. Officer Greg Mathers, white, mid-40s, square jaw, thick arms, and the kind of posture that let you know he thought he owned whatever ground he stood on. His hand hovered near his belt, where his holster sat. "Sorry," Jasmine muttered, stepping back. Mathers didn't move. His eyes locked onto her like she was a problem that needed solving. "You got an attitude?" Jasmine hesitated. She'd learned, through years of subtle lessons, that cops like this didn't appreciate hesitation. She kept her voice measured. "No, sir." The "sir" was a shield, not respect. Mathers exhaled sharply, glancing her over like he was searching for something to justify what he already wanted to do. "What's in your pockets?" Jasmine blinked. "Excuse me? You deaf?" "I said empty your pockets." She felt her stomach tighten. "I just came out of the store. I have my receipt." Mathers stepped closer. "I didn't ask for your receipt. Empty your pockets." Anthony, still locking the car, turned at the sound of raised voices. His eyes immediately found Jasmine, the tension in her shoulders, the way Mathers had positioned himself. Too close, too aggressive. Something wasn't right. "What's going on?" Anthony called out, closing the car door. Mathers didn't even glance his way. His focus was locked onto Jasmine. "You been stealing?" Jasmine's face twisted in frustration. "I just told you. Watch your tone," Mathers interrupted. His voice had that edge now, the kind that turned small misunderstandings into handcuffs. Anthony stepped forward. "She's not stealing." Mathers still didn't look at him. "Sir, I'm asking your daughter to comply with a lawful order." Anthony's patience was wearing thin. "That's not an order. That's harassment." Jasmine exhaled through her nose, forcing herself to stay calm. "I have my receipt right here," she said, reaching into her jacket. Mathers moved fast, too fast. His fist flew before she even had the chance to react. Crack. The sound of bone against skin. Jasmine hit the pavement hard. The impact sent a ripple of silence through the parking lot. The soda bottle rolled out of her grasp, liquid spilling onto the pavement. Someone gasped. A woman in the distance muttered, "Oh my God!" Jasmine's mind reeled. A dull ringing filled her ears, drowning out everything else. The pain in her jaw pulsed, sharp and immediate. She tasted blood, and then silence. For a long, stretched-out second, nobody moved, until her father's voice cut through the air. "Put your hands behind your back." Mathers smirked, still standing over Jasmine. "Or what?" Anthony reached into his pocket, pulled out his badge, and held it up. The new chief of police. Mathers's face changed in an instant. And just like that, the power shifted. But this was far from over. For the first time, Mathers froze. His smirk twitched, like his brain was scrambling to process what he had just done. The gas station parking lot, once filled with quiet murmurs and gas pumps humming in the background, had turned into a dead zone of silence. The weight of a dozen camera phones recording the scene pressed into him. Anthony stood firm, his badge glinting under the afternoon sun. His grip on it was loose, too casual for someone who had just flipped the power dynamic on its head. But his voice? His voice carried the kind of authority that didn't waver. "Turn around," Anthony said. Mathers swallowed. "Chief, I said, turn around." There was no yelling, no theatrics, just cold, even words that cut straight through the thick air. Mathers' eyes darted around the lot, searching for something. Backup, an ally, an escape, but there was none. His patrol car sat empty. The bystanders had their phones out, but no one looked like they were about to step in for him. Jasmine was still on the ground, propped up on one elbow, her lips split and swelling. Her eyes, bright with shock and pain, locked onto her father. She had never seen him like this. Not angry, not emotional, just done. Mathers exhaled hard through his nose. His hands twitched at his sides, fingers flexing. "Look, Chief, let's talk." Anthony moved. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Mathers' wrist, spun him, and slammed his arms behind his back, the same way Mathers had done to so many others before. The same grip, the same pressure, the same lack of hesitation. Mathers grunted. "This is ridiculous." "You assaulted a minor," Anthony said flatly, "and you're about to find out what happens next." The cuffs clicked. A real sound, a final sound. A ripple of voices spread through the crowd. Someone cheered. Another person muttered, "About damn time." Jasmine finally pulled herself up, her movements slow. Her face burned, not just from the hit, but from the sheer humiliation. Blood pooled at the corner of her mouth, and she wiped it with the back of her hand, staring at the smudge of red. Her father turned to her, his eyes softening just slightly. "You good?" Jasmine wanted to say something, anything, but her throat felt tight. She just gave a small, barely there nod. Anthony turned back to Mathers. "You want to explain why you punched my daughter in the face?" Mathers scoffed. His voice was lower now, less sure. "I thought she was reaching for something." "For what?" Anthony shot back. "A gun? A weapon? Or maybe just a receipt?" Mathers clenched his jaw. "I was acting in the interest of safety." Anthony stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Mathers could hear. "And whose safety was at risk? Yours?" "Because a 17-year-old girl was reaching into her pocket." Silence. Anthony exhaled through his nose, adjusting his grip on Mathers' cuffs. "You're done." Mathers let out a breathy chuckle, like he still had a card to play. "Come on, Chief. We don't have to do this here. Let's handle this in-house." Anthony let the words sit between them for a second. Then he leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "There is no we." Mathers swallowed hard. Anthony straightened, scanning the crowd, the phones, the faces. He knew how this worked, knew how fast the city would react, how quickly the department would scramble. The story had already left this parking lot. But the real fight was just beginning. The weight of the moment settled in like thick air before a storm. Mathers stood there, arms restrained behind his back, the cold steel of the handcuffs pressing into his skin. His breathing was shallow, uneven, a man realizing he'd finally run out of luck. Anthony tightened his grip on the cuffs. He could feel Mathers resisting, not outright fighting, but his body tensed like a coiled spring. It was a strange reversal of power. For years, Mathers had been the one standing over people, using intimidation as his weapon. Now he was just another man in cuffs, and he didn't know how to handle it. Anthony spoke low and steady, his words carrying the weight of something undeniable. "You're under arrest for assaulting a minor." Mathers jerked in his grasp. "This is a mistake." Anthony ignored him. "You have the right to remain silent." Mathers' face twisted. "Chief, come on. You're really gonna—" "You have the right to an attorney. If you can't afford one, the court will provide you with—" "Jesus Christ, Anthony!" Mathers' voice cracked, the bravado slipping. For the first time, he looked scared. Anthony finished the Miranda warning without breaking eye contact. His grip didn't loosen. There were no favors here. The crowd had grown. More people had gathered, stepping closer but keeping their distance. Some recorded, some whispered to each other, some just stared, taking in the moment. One man in the front shook his head. "All these years, this dude been out here treating people like dirt." A woman next to him folded her arms. "Guess he finally picked the wrong one." Jasmine leaned against the car now, pressing an ice-cold soda bottle to the side of her swollen face. Her lips stung every time she swallowed. But she wasn't thinking about the pain. She was thinking about everything that led up to this. She had seen videos like this before. Black men and women pinned to the ground, handcuffed, mistreated. She'd grown up knowing the rules. Keep your hands visible. Don't talk back. Be polite. Don't give them an excuse. She had followed all of them. And she still got punched. Her father glanced at her, eyes scanning for something unsaid. She knew what he was asking. "Are you okay? Not just physically, but really." She swallowed and nodded. Not because she was okay, but because she refused to give Mathers any more power over her. Anthony turned back to his officers. His department now. "Take him in." 2 officers moved in, grabbing Mathers by the arms. His jaw clenched, his face red with a mix of anger and embarrassment. "You're making a damn mistake," he muttered under his breath as they led him toward a patrol car. Anthony didn't respond, because he knew the truth. The only mistake would have been letting this slide. Mathers' radio crackled as he was shoved into the back seat. The patrol car door slammed shut, a final punctuation mark on his downfall, but Anthony knew better than to think it was over. Because the real battle wasn't just about one bad cop, it was about what happened next. The station was buzzing by the time Anthony and Jasmine arrived. Officers stood in clusters, whispering, some glancing at him with wide eyes, others avoiding his gaze entirely. It was one thing to hear about what happened. It was another to watch one of their own being dragged through the doors in handcuffs. Mathers sat in the booking area, his face tight with barely contained fury. He hadn't said much since being stuffed into the patrol car, but his silence was louder than words. Anthony could feel the tension in the room, the unspoken challenge hanging in the air. Some of these officers had worked with Mathers for years. Some of them probably agreed with him. They were waiting to see what kind of chief Anthony would be. He wasn't about to keep them guessing. He walked toward the front desk, where a younger officer, Lopez, sat looking between him and Mathers like he was caught in the middle of something way above his pay grade. "Get him processed," Anthony said, his voice level. Lopez hesitated, glancing toward the other officers. "Chief, are you sure we—" Anthony cut him off with a look. "Do your job." Lopez swallowed and nodded, pushing the necessary paperwork forward. Mathers glared at Anthony as his fingerprints were taken. His lip curled. "You think this is gonna stick?" Anthony didn't respond. He knew how this worked. Mathers wasn't scared of a few charges. He was betting on the system to protect him. He was betting that the union would step in, that the department would hesitate, that people would forget. But Anthony wasn't about to let that happen. Jasmine stood near the entrance, arms crossed, watching everything unfold. Her cheek was still swollen, the bruising darkening under the fluorescent lights. Every now and then she caught an officer looking at her, not out of concern, but curiosity. She wasn't supposed to be here. Black girls weren't supposed to be in police stations unless they were in trouble. But she wasn't here as a suspect. She was here as a witness. The door to the station swung open, and Anthony didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The mayor. James Calloway had the posture of a man who didn't like surprises. His suit was crisp, his hair neatly combed, but there was a tightness in his expression that told Anthony exactly what this visit was about. "We need to talk," Calloway said. Anthony nodded once. "My office." They walked past the stairs, past the murmurs, into a space where the walls wouldn't have ears. The moment the door shut, Calloway's polished demeanor cracked. "Do you have any idea how many calls I've gotten today?" he hissed. Anthony leaned against his desk. "Let me guess. Half want Mathers fired immediately. The other half want me gone." Calloway exhaled sharply. "You already know how this works. This department protects its own. You think just because you got a badge, you can walk in and start making arrests like this won't blow back on you?" Anthony's face remained unreadable. "He hit my daughter." Calloway hesitated. Anthony leaned forward. "And you're asking me if I regret arresting him?" Calloway shook his head, rubbing his temples. "The union's already involved. His lawyer's already making noise about excessive force and false arrest. And don't think for a second the media won't twist this into something else." Anthony crossed his arms. "They can twist it however they want. The video speaks for itself." The mayor sighed. "This town doesn't like change, Anthony." Anthony met his gaze, unwavering. "Then it's about to get uncomfortable." Calloway stared at him for a long moment, sizing him up, testing his resolve. Then he exhaled and nodded slowly. "All right," he muttered. "Let's see where this goes." But Anthony already knew where it was going. Straight through the heart of a system that wasn't ready for someone like him. The next morning, the town woke up to headlines that couldn't be ignored. Police chief arrests officer for assaulting teenager. Gas station incident sparks outrage. Calls for police reform intensify. The video had gone viral overnight. News stations picked it up. Social media tore into Mathers. His history, his record, every complaint that had been filed against him, but never stuck. The floodgates had opened. Jasmine sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. Her name wasn't in the articles, but she knew they were talking about her. She was the teen victim. The black minor assaulted by a police officer. She exhaled sharply, locking her screen. This is insane. Across from her, Anthony sipped his coffee, the morning paper folded on the table. He wasn't smiling, because he knew what came next. The pushback. The people who would say Mathers was just doing his job. The ones who would turn Jasmine into the problem instead of the victim. They always did. His phone rang. "Reed," he answered. His voice neutral. His deputy's voice came through, tight with tension. "Chief, Mathers made bail. He's already out." Anthony expected that. Mathers had too many connections, too many people willing to throw money at a problem if it meant keeping things quiet. But this wasn't going to be quiet. His deputy hesitated. "And he's threatening to sue." Anthony almost laughed. Of course he was. Of course a man like Mathers would play the victim the moment the tables turned. Jasmine's fingers curled into her hoodie sleeves. "Are you serious?" Anthony nodded slowly, rubbing his temple. "Yeah, he's serious." The lawsuit was just a tactic, a desperate attempt to turn the conversation away from what he did. It wouldn't hold up. The video was clear as day. But it was still a fight, and this was never just about Mathers. The police union had already stepped in, calling his arrest an overreaction. Some officers in the department had already started picking sides. The mayor was playing it careful, trying to be diplomatic, trying to keep things from boiling over. But Anthony wasn't here to play politics. He was here to fix a system that had been broken long before he arrived. And fixing things? It made people uncomfortable. Jasmine studied him for a long moment. "Are they going to try to push you out?" Anthony exhaled. "They'll try, but you're not leaving." His eyes met hers, steady, unwavering. Not a chance, because Mathers wasn't just one bad cop. He was a symptom of something bigger, and Anthony was just getting started. The backlash came fast. Threats, smears, a campaign to discredit him. The usual playbook when someone dared to challenge the system. Some officers in the department had gone quiet around him. Others had made it clear where they stood, with Mathers. It didn't surprise Anthony. What did surprise him was how loud the town had become. Protests erupted outside the station, not just against Mathers, but against every officer who had protected men like him. People were tired of hearing the same stories, tired of watching the same cycles repeat. Anthony stood at his office window, looking down at the crowd. Jasmine was somewhere in there. He hadn't tried to stop her from going. She deserved to be there. The door to his office swung open. Mayor Calloway, again. "You made this a lot bigger than it needed to be," Calloway said, without preamble. Anthony turned slowly, arching a brow. "I made it bigger," Calloway sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You could have handled this differently. Internally." "Internally," Anthony repeated, voice flat. "Like every other time Mathers harassed someone and walked away untouched?" Calloway didn't answer. Anthony stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. "You think this is about me? I could lose my job tomorrow, and this wouldn't stop. People are done being polite about injustice. You might not like the noise, but the silence is what got us here." Calloway exhaled, running a hand through his greying hair. "The police union is pressuring the city council. They want Mathers reinstated." Anthony shook his head, laughing under his breath. "Not happening. He's got powerful people backing him." "Good," Anthony said. "Because so do I." He turned back toward the window, watching the protesters chant his daughter's name. Jasmine Cole. Not victim. Not unidentified black teenager. Her name, loud and clear. She had been knocked down, but she got back up, just like this town would. Just like Anthony would. Calloway sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're really not backing down?" Anthony turned, meeting his gaze. "Not now. Not ever. Because if this town was about to change, somebody had to lead the way. And he was ready.